The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the sidewalks of downtown into rivers of neon reflections. Lily pressed herself closer against the brick wall of Romano's, one of those restaurants where a single meal costs more than most people spend on groceries in a week. The overhang barely kept her dry, but it was better than nothing. She was 19, though she looked older. The streets had a way of doing that to you. Her jacket, once a deep navy blue, was now faded and stained with things she tried not to think about. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around her face, and her hands were tucked deep in her pockets, trying to preserve what little warmth she had left. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see them, the beautiful people, women in designer dresses that probably cost thousands of dollars, men in suits so crisp they looked like they'd never seen a wrinkle. They laughed and clinked glasses filled with wine that Lily knew cost more per bottle than she used to spend on rent. But it wasn't the people that made her stop walking. It was the piano. Right there in the center of the restaurant sat a magnificent grand piano, black and glossy, reflecting the warm light of the chandeliers above. Even from outside, even through the rain-streaked glass, Lily could tell it was a Steinway. Maybe a Model D, the kind of instrument she used to dream about playing used to. She tore her eyes away. Looking only made it hurt worse. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when she'd found half a sandwich in a trash can behind a deli. She knew she should move on, try another restaurant, another street, another night. But her legs felt heavy and the rain wasn't letting up. The restaurant doors swung open with a burst of warm air and laughter. 3 men stepped out, all wearing expensive coats. The one in the middle was talking loudly, gesturing with his hands, clearly pleased with himself. The other 2 laughed at whatever he was saying. Lily recognized the type immediately. The middle one was obviously the boss, maybe 40 years old, with perfectly styled hair and a watch that caught the streetlight just right, the kind of watch that cost more than a car. The other 2 orbited around him like moons around a planet, eager to please, quick to laugh at his jokes. She should have stayed quiet, should have made herself invisible like she'd learned to do. But her stomach growled again, louder this time, and desperation made her brave. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you spare some change? Or maybe some food?" The 3 men stopped. The 2 on either side looked at her with that expression she knew too well. That mixture of disgust and discomfort, like they'd stepped in something unpleasant and couldn't wait to scrape it off their shoes. "Keep walking," one of them said, not to her, but to the man in the middle, but the middle man. Victor Blake stopped and looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes moved from her worn shoes to her stained jacket to her wet hair. There was something in his expression that Lily couldn't quite read. Not sympathy, but not quite cruelty either. Curiosity, maybe, or amusement. "Another one," he said, shaking his head. "You know, I just spent $300 on dinner in there. $300 for food I barely touched because I was too busy talking about the quarterly reports." His friends laughed, though Lily wasn't sure what was supposed to be funny. "Please," she said again, hating how small her voice sounded. "I haven't eaten and do you know what I hate?" Victor interrupted, taking a step closer. "I hate how you people think the world owes you something. Like success just falls from the sky." Lily wanted to tell him that she didn't think anyone owed her anything, that she used to work hard, used to have dreams, used to be somebody, but the words stuck in her throat. Victor's eyes drifted past her to the restaurant window behind her, to the piano sitting there in all its glory. Then he looked back at her and something flickered across his face. An idea, or maybe just a cruel thought looking for a way out. "You want food?" he asked. Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Then earn it." He gestured toward the window, toward the piano. "You see that piano in there? If you can play it, if you can actually play it well enough to impress me, I'll buy you dinner. A real dinner. Whatever you want from the menu." His friends laughed outright now. "Come on, Victor," one of them said. "Let's just go. The car's waiting." But Victor held up his hand, his eyes never leaving Lily's face. "I'm serious. You want charity? Fine, but show me you deserve it. Prove you're not just another homeless person looking for a handout." Lily felt her face burn with shame, even through the cold. She should walk away, should tell him what he could do with his challenge. But her eyes drifted back to the piano and something stirred in her chest. Something she thought had died 8 months ago when she'd lost everything. "I can play," she heard herself say. Victor's smile widened. Oh, this is going to be good. Come on then. He strode back toward the restaurant entrance, and his friends followed, laughing and shaking their heads. Lily stood there for a moment, her heart pounding. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. She looked down at them, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the calluses that had formed in all the wrong places from sleeping on concrete instead of piano keys. What was she doing? But her feet were already moving, following them back toward the warm light and the beautiful people and the piano that waited like a ghost from her past life. The restaurant manager met them at the door, his smile professional but strained when he saw Lily. "Mr. Blake," he said, uncertain. "How can I help you?" "This young lady is going to play your piano," Victor announced, loud enough that several nearby tables turned to look. "Clear a path for her." The manager's face went pale. "Sir, I don't think I'm a regular here, Thomas. I spend more money in this restaurant in a month than most people make in a year. She's going to play, and you're going to let her." The manager looked at Lily, at her dirty clothes and wet hair, then back at Victor. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Lily walked into the restaurant, and every eye turned toward her. She could hear the whispers, could feel the judgment radiating from every table. A woman wrinkled her nose and leaned away as Lily passed. A man muttered something to his date, who laughed behind her hand. The piano sat in the center of the room like an island, and Lily walked toward it like a woman in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She wasn't sure anymore. She reached the bench and stood there for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keys. They were perfect. Clean and white and perfectly in tune, she could tell without even pressing one. She sat down slowly, the velvet bench feeling strange after months of sitting on cardboard and concrete. Behind her, she could hear Victor and his friends settling into nearby chairs. Could hear the restaurant going quiet, everyone waiting to see what would happen, waiting for her to fail. She placed her hands on the keys, and for the first time in 8 months, Lily felt like she was home. Lily's fingers rested on the keys, and for a long moment she couldn't move. The ivory felt cool and smooth under her fingertips, so different from everything she'd touched in the past 8 months. No rough cardboard, no cold concrete, no metal shopping cart handles, just this. Just music waiting to be born. Behind her, someone coughed. Someone else whispered. She could feel Victor's eyes on her back, could practically hear his smirk. He was waiting for her to fail. They all were. Waiting for the homeless girl to embarrass herself so they could all go back to their expensive meals and forget she existed. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them, at the dirt she couldn't quite scrub away with rainwater, at the broken nail on her index finger. These hands used to be beautiful, used to be clean and cared for, with lotion applied every night to keep them soft. Her teacher used to say that a pianist's hands were their most precious tool. What would her teacher think if she could see her now? Lily closed her eyes. She couldn't think about that. Couldn't think about everything she'd lost. If she started down that road, she'd fall apart right here in front of everyone. She took a breath, then another, and then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated through the restaurant like whispers. Soft and gentle, almost questioning, Lily's fingers found their old patterns, muscle memory taking over where her conscious mind wanted to freeze. The melody was bittersweet, melancholy but beautiful, and it felt like coming home after being lost for years. The restaurant didn't go quiet all at once. First, the tables closest to the piano stopped talking, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Then the next ring of tables. Then the ones after that like ripples spreading across water. Within 30 seconds, the only sound in Romano's was the piano. Lily kept her eyes closed. She didn't want to see their faces. Didn't want to know if they were judging her or pitying her or laughing at her. All that mattered was the music. All that existed was this moment, these keys, this piece that she'd played 1,000 times before but never quite like this. Because this time, she understood it, really understood it. When she'd first learned this nocturne at 15, it had been just another assignment. Beautiful, yes, but academic. Something to master technically, to perform correctly. But now, after months of sleeping in doorways and going hungry and watching people look through her like she was invisible, the music meant something different. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story of loss and longing, and the ache of remembering better days. Her left hand carried the steady rhythm, the heartbeat of the piece, while her right hand sang out the melody. The notes soared and fell, questioned and answered, wept and hoped. Her fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that her heart didn't feel, but the music didn't lie. It couldn't. Music was the one honest thing left in her life. At a table near the window, an elderly woman set down her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. She'd come to Romano's every week for 10 years, always sitting at the same table, always ordering the same meal. But she'd never heard the piano played like this. There was something raw in it, something real that made her think of her late husband, of the life they'd built together, of the empty house she went home to every night across the room. A young couple on their third date stopped pretending to care about their conversation and just listened. The man reached across the table and took the woman's hand, and neither of them quite knew why, except that the music made them feel something they couldn't name. Victor Blake sat very still in his chair. His friends had stopped laughing. One of them had his mouth slightly open, frozen in whatever joke he'd been about to make. The other was staring at Lily with an expression somewhere between shock and shame, but Victor couldn't look away from her hands. From the way they moved across the keys like they were meant to be there, like the piano had been waiting for her all along. He'd expected her to stumble through chopsticks or maybe the opening of Fur Elise if she was lucky. He'd expected entertainment. A story to tell at the office on Monday about the homeless girl who couldn't play. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. The music built toward its first climax, and Lily's fingers pressed harder into the keys, pulling out deeper sounds, richer tones. The melody climbed higher and higher, reaching for something just out of grasp, and then it fell back down like tears, like rain, like all the nights she'd spent wondering how her life had fallen apart so completely. A waiter stood frozen by the kitchen door, a tray of food in his hands, completely forgetting where he was supposed to deliver it. The chef had come out from the back, wiping his hands on his apron, drawn by the sound. Even Thomas, the manager who'd been so reluctant to let her in, stood transfixed by the host stand. Lily's fingers flew through the faster middle section, the notes tumbling over each other like water over rocks, technically perfect but emotionally overwhelming. She hadn't played in 8 months. 8 months of silence, of avoiding music stores because walking past them hurt too much, of covering her ears when she heard street musicians because it reminded her of everything she'd lost. But the music hadn't forgotten her. Her body remembered every lesson, every practice session, every performance, the countless hours she'd spent at the piano as a child while other kids played outside. The sacrifices her mother had made to pay for lessons, to buy her first real piano, to send her to summer programs. All of it came flooding back through her fingers. Tears started running down her face, but she didn't stop playing. Couldn't stop. The music had her now, and it wasn't done with her yet. At the bar, a businessman who'd been checking his phone put it down slowly, his work crisis suddenly feeling very small and very unimportant. At table 12, a woman who'd been arguing with her husband about money went quiet, realizing how petty their problems were compared to whatever story this girl was telling through her music. The nocturne moved toward its ending, the melody growing softer again, more gentle. Lily's touch on the keys lightened, became almost hesitant, like someone saying goodbye. The final notes hung in the air like mist, fading slowly, reluctantly, until there was nothing left but silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence stretched out heavy and thick, and Lily sat frozen at the piano, her hand still hovering over the keys, terrified to turn around and face whatever came next. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly woman by the window, her hands coming together slowly at first, then faster. Then the young couple joined in. Then the businessman at the bar. Then everyone, the entire restaurant rising to their feet, applause washing over Lily like a wave. She turned around slowly, and the sight made her breath catch. They were all standing, all of them, the beautiful people in their expensive clothes clapping for her. Some were crying. The elderly woman had tears streaming down her face. Even Thomas, the manager, was applauding, looking stunned. Lily's eyes found Victor. He was still sitting, but his expression had completely changed. The smirk was gone. The amusement was gone. He was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and there was something in his face that looked almost like shame. Their eyes met across the restaurant, and in that moment something shifted, something fundamental and important that neither of them quite understood yet, but both of them felt. Victor stood up slowly, still clapping, And for the first time that night, Lily saw him as something other than just another cruel rich man looking for entertainment. She saw confusion in his eyes, regret, maybe even the first stirrings of understanding. The applause continued, washing over her, through her, and Lily realized she was crying harder now. But these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were something else, something she couldn't quite name but hadn't felt in 8 months. They felt almost like hope. The applause eventually faded, but the energy in the room remained. Lily stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. People were still looking at her, but their expressions had changed. No more disgust, no more judgment, just something softer, something that looked almost like respect. Victor walked toward her slowly, and his friend stayed behind, both looking uncomfortable. When he reached her, he extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and let it drop. "You can play," he said quietly, and there was no mockery in his voice anymore, just statement of fact. Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I made you a promise," Victor continued. "Come on, sit down. Order whatever you want." He gestured to his table, and Lily hesitated. Part of her wanted to run, wanted to take this small victory and escape before something went wrong, before he changed his mind or decided this had all been some elaborate joke. But her stomach growled again, louder this time, and her legs felt weak. She hadn't just played the piano. She'd poured 8 months of pain into those keys, and it had left her hollowed out. She followed him to the table. His friends had disappeared, probably gone outside to wait by the car. Smart of them. They'd just watched their boss humiliate himself, and nobody wanted to stick around for that conversation. Thomas rushed over with menus, his whole attitude different now. "Please," he said, actually pulling out Lily's chair for her. "Whatever you'd like." "On the house," Victor shook his head. "Put it on my bill, Thomas. I made a deal." Lily opened the menu, and her hands started shaking again. The prices made her dizzy. $30 for pasta, $50 for salmon, $65 for steak. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen this much food described in one place. Her eyes blurred, and she realized she was crying again. "Order whatever you want," Victor said, gentler this time. "I mean it." "The chicken," Lily managed to say, pointing to something in the middle of the menu. "And maybe some soup, if that's okay." "Thomas, bring her the French onion soup, the roasted chicken with vegetables, and the chocolate cake for dessert. And water. And coffee if she wants it." "Yes, sir, right away." Thomas practically ran toward the kitchen. They sat in silence for a moment. Victor seemed to be struggling with something, opening his mouth and then closing it again. Finally, he said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the restaurant. "Conservatory," she said quietly. "Which one?" "Manhattan School of Music. Before that, I did 2 years at Juilliard's pre-college program." Victor's eyebrows went up. "Juilliard?" Lily nodded. "I got a full scholarship. Started when I was 16. So what happened?" He asked it carefully, like he knew he was stepping on fragile ground. "How did you end up on the streets?" Lily finished for him. She'd asked herself that question 1,000 times. "My mom got sick, cancer. It happened really fast." The soup arrived, steaming and rich, and Lily had to stop herself from grabbing the spoon too quickly. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though her body was screaming at her to devour everything in sight. "I'm sorry," Victor said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "She didn't have insurance," Lily continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. "She'd always meant to get it, but she worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, and she kept putting it off. When she got diagnosed, it was already stage 4. The soup was the most delicious thing Lily had ever tasted, or maybe she was just so hungry that everything tasted like heaven. She took another spoonful before continuing. "I dropped out to take care of her, told myself I'd go back after she got better, but she didn't get better." Lily's voice cracked. "She fought for 6 months. The treatments cost everything. We sold our furniture, sold my piano, maxed out every credit card. It still wasn't enough." Victor sat very still, his water glass untouched in front of him. "When she died, I had nothing. No money, no place to live. They'd already evicted us for missing rent. I was 19 years old, sitting in a hospital room with my mother's body. And I didn't even know where I was going to sleep that night. The chicken arrived, perfectly roasted with crispy skin and vegetables that looked like they'd been painted onto the plate. Lily stared at it for a moment, then picked up her fork and knife. Her hands remembered how to do this, at least. How to eat like a normal person instead of shoving food into her mouth like an animal. "What about other family?" Victor asked. Lily shook her head. "My mom raised me alone. I never knew my dad. She had a sister in California, but they hadn't spoken in years. I tried calling her after Mom died. She sent a card with $50 in it. That lasted about a week. She took a bite of chicken, and it was so good she almost cried again. When was the last time she'd eaten something hot? Something that didn't come from a dumpster or a dollar menu? I tried to find work," she continued. "But nobody wants to hire you when you don't have an address. Can't put currently homeless on a job application. And I couldn't afford interview clothes. Couldn't afford a phone. Couldn't afford anything." She laughed, but it sounded bitter. "You know what's funny? I have a degree from Juilliard. Partial degree anyway. I can play piano better than 99% of the population. But that doesn't matter when you're sleeping in a subway station." Victor was quiet for a long time. When Lily looked up at him, his expression had changed again. The shame from earlier had deepened into something else. Something that looked almost like pain. "I've been homeless," he said quietly. Lily stopped eating, surprised. "Not for long," Victor continued. "Just a few weeks when I was 22. I'd moved to the city for a job that fell through. Spent everything I had on the apartment deposit and first month's rent. Then the company went bankrupt before I even started. Suddenly I was in New York with no job, no money, and a landlord who kicked me out the second I couldn't pay. He picked up his water glass, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. I slept in my car for 3 weeks, showered at a gym I'd prepaid for, ate whatever I could afford, which wasn't much. I thought I was going to die there in that car, a complete failure." He looked directly at Lily. "Then someone gave me a chance. A professor I'd met at a job fair. He remembered me, saw me looking desperate at a coffee shop, and offered me a position at his startup. It wasn't much. Barely minimum wage, but it was enough. It saved my life." Lily set down her fork. "So why did you do that to me? Outside? Why did you make me prove myself like that?" Victor closed his eyes. "Because I forgot. I built my company, made my millions, started eating at places like this and wearing watches that cost more than cars, and somewhere along the way I forgot what it felt like. I forgot that I was you once, that I was desperate and scared and invisible." He opened his eyes and they were wet. "When you asked me for help, all I saw was an inconvenience. Another homeless person with their hand out. I didn't see a person, didn't see someone's daughter, someone who'd lost everything through no fault of their own." He swallowed hard. "I saw you as less than human. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The chocolate cake arrived, but neither of them looked at it. The restaurant had mostly cleared out, just a few late diners lingering over coffee. Thomas hovered nearby, clearly wanting to close up but not daring to rush them. "You know what the worst part is?" Lily said softly. "I haven't played piano in 8 months. I've walked past music stores and covered my ears because hearing it hurt too much. It reminded me of everything I lost, my mom, my future, everything. But you played tonight, because I was desperate, because I was hungry." Lily looked at the piano, still sitting there in the center of the room. "But when I started playing, something happened. For those few minutes, I wasn't homeless. I wasn't hungry or cold or scared. I was just me again, the person I used to be." Victor was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if you could be that person all the time?" Lily laughed, but it was hollow. "With what? I can't even afford to eat, much less rent a place with a piano." "What if someone helped you?" Victor asked. "What if someone gave you the same kind of chance that Professor gave me?" Lily looked at him carefully, afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" Victor leaned forward. "I'm saying that maybe we both needed tonight. You needed food and a moment to remember who you are, and I needed to remember what it's like to be human." He paused. "I have an idea, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Lily thought about it. Thought about the streets waiting for her outside. Thought about the cold and the hunger and the endless nights of wondering if tomorrow would be the day she just gave up. Then she thought about the piano. About the feeling of the keys under her fingers. About the way the music had poured out of her like it had been trapped inside all along, just waiting for permission to exist. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll trust you." Victor smiled, and for the first time all night it looked real. Victor pulled out his phone and started typing something. Lily ate her cake slowly, watching him. still not quite sure what was happening. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to laugh and tell her this was all part of the joke, for his friends to come back in and reveal they'd been filming her the whole time. But Victor just kept typing, his expression serious and focused. The same expression he probably wore when he was running his company, making decisions that affected hundreds of people. Finally, he looked up. "I own a tech company," he said. "Blake Technologies. We're in the financial software space, nothing exciting. But 3 years ago, I built a new headquarters outside the city. Big campus, lots of amenities for employees. Gym, cafeteria, meditation rooms, the whole package." Lily nodded, not sure where this was going. "One of the amenities is a concert hall. Nothing huge, seats about 200 people. We use it for employee events, stress relief programs, sometimes client presentations. The idea was to create a space where people could disconnect from work and experience something beautiful. Music, art, culture." He leaned forward, and his eyes were intense now, focused on her like she was the only person in the world. "We had a pianist, older guy, retired from teaching. He'd come in 3 times a week and play during lunch hours. Sometimes he'd do evening concerts. Nothing fancy, just an hour of good music. Employees loved it. Said it helped them think, helped them relax." Victor paused. "He retired last month. Moved to Florida to be near his grandkids. We haven't found a replacement yet." Lily's heart started beating faster. She could see where this was going, but she was afraid to believe it. "I want to offer you a job," Victor said simply. "Come play piano at my company. 3 days a week, maybe 4 if you want. We'll pay you a salary. Not a fortune, but enough to live on. And we have a program that helps employees find housing. Usually it's for people relocating from other cities. But I think we can make an exception." The chocolate cake suddenly tasted like cardboard in Lily's mouth. She swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're talented. Because my employees deserve to hear music like what you played tonight. And because—" Victor stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most. Maybe it's time I paid that forward." "You don't even know me," Lily said. "What if I'm unreliable? What if I'm on drugs or mentally ill or dangerous? Are you any of those things?" "No, but you don't know that." Victor smiled slightly. "I'm a pretty good judge of character. Built a whole company on it. And besides, I'm not asking you to move into my house. I'm offering you a job. You show up, you play piano, you get paid. If it doesn't work out, we part ways. Simple as that, but it wasn't simple and they both knew it. This wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. It was the difference between surviving and drowning. And that made it terrifying. "What if I fail?" Lily asked, and her voice cracked. "What if I can't do it? I haven't had a routine in 8 months. I haven't had to show up anywhere or be responsible for anything except staying alive. What if I mess this up?" Victor reached across the table and stopped just short of touching her hand. "Then you mess it up, and we figure it out. But Lily, you just played one of the most technically difficult pieces in the piano repertoire from memory, after not touching a piano for 8 months. I think you can handle showing up 3 times a week." Lily wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But hope was dangerous. Hope was what made the fall hurt worse when it inevitably came. "I need to think about it," she said, even though she knew what her answer would be, what her answer had to be. "Take the night," Victor said. "Here." He pulled out his wallet and handed her a business card. "That's my direct number. Call me tomorrow anytime. We'll work out the details." Then he pulled out several bills and laid them on the table. They were hundreds. 5 of them. "This isn't charity," he said quickly when he saw her expression. "Consider it an advance on your first paycheck. You're going to need clothes for work. Maybe a decent meal or 2 while you think about my offer. And a hotel room for tonight because it's freezing out there and I'm not sending you back to the streets." Lily stared at the money. $500. She hadn't held that much cash in over a year. Her hands were shaking so badly she wasn't sure she could pick it up. "I can't," she started to say, but Victor cut her off. "Yes, you can, and you will. Because if you're going to work for me, you need to show up clean and rested. Can't have my pianist falling asleep at the keys." He said it lightly, trying to make it a joke, but his eyes were serious. Lily reached out and took the money, and as soon as her fingers closed around it, she started crying again. Big, ugly sobs that she couldn't control. She covered her face with her hands, embarrassed but unable to stop. "Hey," Victor said gently. It's okay. You're okay. But that was the problem. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay in so long that she'd forgotten what okay felt like. And now, sitting in this expensive restaurant with a full stomach and money in her hands and the possibility of a real job, she was more terrified than she'd been in months. Because what if this disappeared? What if she woke up tomorrow and realized it had all been a dream? What if Victor changed his mind, or his company rejected her, or she screwed it all up? Thomas appeared with a box of leftovers carefully packed. For later, he said kindly, setting it on the table. And miss, I just wanted to say that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in my 20 years working here. Thank you. Lily managed to nod, wiping her eyes with a napkin. Victor stood up, and Lily did too, clutching the money and the takeout box like they might vanish if she didn't hold on tight enough. They walked to the door together, and Victor held it open for her. The rain had stopped and the street smelled clean and fresh. There's a hotel 2 blocks down, Victor said, pointing. The Riverside Inn, tell them I sent you. They know me there. They'll take care of you. Thank you, Lily whispered. For everything. For the food and the money and the job offer and just everything. Victor looked at her for a long moment. You know what I realized tonight? When you were playing? Lily shook her head. I realized that we're all one bad break away from where you are. One illness. One job loss. One piece of bad luck. The only difference between you and me is timing and circumstance. Not worth. Not value. Not humanity. He paused. I forgot that. But you reminded me. So really, I should be thanking you. He raised his hand in a small wave and walked toward a waiting car. Lily stood there on the sidewalk, watching him leave, still not quite believing any of this was real. The hotel was exactly where Victor said it would be. The lobby was small but clean, with warm lighting and a tired-looking man behind the desk. When Lily walked in, he looked up and his expression immediately became guarded. Can I help you? Victor Blake sent me, Lily said, her voice stronger than she expected. He said you'd have a room? The man's expression changed immediately. Oh, yes, of course, Mr. Blake called ahead. Let me get you checked in. 5 minutes later, Lily was standing in a small hotel room with a real bed and clean sheets and a bathroom with a shower that had hot water. She set down her takeout box and her backpack and just stood there, afraid to move, afraid to touch anything. Then she walked into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for the first time in weeks. She barely recognized the person staring back at her. Hollow eyes, dirty skin, hair that desperately needed washing. But underneath all that, she could still see traces of who she used to be, who she might be again. She turned on the shower and waited for the water to get hot. While she waited, she pulled out Victor's business card and read it again, making sure it was real. Victor Blake, CEO, Blake Technologies, a phone number, an address. It was real. All of it was real. Lily stepped into the shower, and as the hot water washed over her, washing away weeks of grime and cold and fear, she let herself cry one more time. But these tears were different. These tears felt like release, like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Tomorrow she would call Victor. Tomorrow she would say yes to the job. Tomorrow she would start building her life back. But tonight she was going to sleep in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. And that, she decided, was more than enough. 6 months later, Lily stood backstage in the concert hall at Blake Technologies, listening to the murmur of voices filling the seats beyond the curtain. Her hands were sweating and her heart was racing, but it was a different kind of nervous than that night at Romano's. This was the good kind, the kind that meant she cared about what she was about to do. She looked down at her dress. Dark blue, simple but elegant, bought with her own money from her own paycheck. Her hands were clean, her nails trimmed and cared for. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like a pianist again. More importantly, she felt like one. The past 6 months had been hard. Harder than she'd expected in some ways, easier in others. The first week she'd woken up every morning convinced it had all been a dream. That Victor would call and tell her he'd changed his mind. That the apartment the company had helped her find would somehow disappear. That she'd wake up back on the streets. But none of that happened. Victor kept his word. The job was real. The apartment was real. The paychecks were real. At first, she'd only played for small groups during lunch breaks. 20 or 30 employees would filter into the concert hall, eating their sandwiches while she played Mozart or Beethoven or Chopin. Some of them would close their eyes and just listen, Others would work on their laptops, the music a gentle background to their tasks. But they always applauded when she finished, and slowly word spread. By the end of the first month, the lunch concerts were packed. People were coming from other departments, other floors. Someone posted a video online of her playing, and it got shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The comments were what got her. People writing about how the music made them cry, how it helped them through difficult days, how they'd never really understood classical piano until they heard her play. One comment in particular stuck with her. You can hear her story in every note. This isn't just technical skill. This is someone who's lived. Victor had been right. The employees loved having a live pianist. But what surprised everyone, including Lily herself, was how much she needed them. After months of being invisible, of people looking through her like she didn't exist, having an audience that actually wanted to hear her play was healing in ways she hadn't expected. She started doing evening concerts once a week. Full programs, 90 minutes of music. Those sold out almost immediately. Victor had to start a lottery system for tickets because so many people wanted to attend. Then the emails started coming. Other companies asking if she did private performances. Concert halls asking if she'd be interested in recitals. A recording studio reaching out about a possible album. And 3 weeks ago, the email that had made her hands shake so badly she'd almost dropped her phone. Manhattan School of Music. Her old school. They'd seen the videos. They wanted her to come back. Full scholarship, finish her degree, no questions asked. They even had an emergency fund to help with living expenses. Tonight's concert was special. It was exactly 6 months since that night at Romano's, and Lily had insisted on marking the occasion. Victor had been reluctant at first, worried about drawing attention to what he still considered a private moment of shame. But Lily had convinced him. This wasn't about his shame. It was about celebrating how far she'd come. How far they'd both come because Victor had changed too. She'd noticed it over the months. The way he talked to people, really talked to them instead of talking at them. The way he'd started a program at the company to hire people who were struggling, who had gaps in their resumes or unconventional backgrounds. Second chance hiring, he called it. So far, they'd brought on 12 people who probably wouldn't have gotten interviews anywhere else. A former addict who'd been clean for 2 years. A woman who'd spent 5 years in prison for a crime she'd committed when she was 19. A man who'd been homeless for 3 years before getting back on his feet. All of them were good at their jobs. All of them were grateful for the opportunity. And all of them knew that the company had given them something precious, a chance to prove they were more than their worst moments. The stage manager peeked through the curtain. 5 minutes, Lily, full house tonight. Lily nodded, taking a deep breath. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see Victor sitting in the front row, right where he always sat for her concerts. Next to him was Thomas from Romano's, and next to Thomas was the elderly woman who'd been the first to applaud that night, the one who'd cried during Lily's performance. Victor had tracked her down and invited her personally. The lights dimmed and the crowd quieted. Lily walked out onto the stage and the applause washed over her like a warm wave. She smiled, waved, sat down at the beautiful Steinway that Victor had purchased specifically for the concert hall. A much nicer piano than the one at Romano's, though she'd always have a soft spot for that one. Thank you all for coming, she said into the microphone they'd set up. She usually didn't speak during concerts, but tonight was different. 6 months ago, I was homeless, hungry, invisible. I thought my life was over. That everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of was gone forever. The room was completely silent. Even though many of them knew her story, hearing her say it out loud was different. Then I met someone who gave me a chance. Not because he had to, not because I deserved it, but because someone had once done the same for him. She looked at Victor, who was visibly uncomfortable with the attention. He reminded me that we're all human, that we all stumble, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is help someone else get back up. She turned back to the piano, her hands finding their place on the keys. Tonight, I'm going to play the same piece I played that night, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, but this time it means something different. That night it was about loss and pain and survival. Tonight it's about gratitude, about hope, about what's possible when someone sees your humanity instead of your circumstances. She began to play and the music filled the hall, the same notes, the same melody, but transformed by everything that had happened since. Where before there had been desperation, now there was strength. Where there had been grief, now there was peace. The music soared and dipped and danced, telling a story of redemption that everyone in the room could feel. When she finished, the silence lasted even longer than it had at Romano's. Then the applause came, and this time Lily let herself enjoy it. Let herself believe she'd earned it, not just through her playing, but through every difficult day of the past 6 months. Every moment she'd chosen to keep going instead of giving up. Victor came up on stage after, which surprised her. He never liked being in the spotlight. He took the microphone with obvious reluctance. "I'm not good at speeches," he started, and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "But I wanted to say something tonight. 6 months ago, I was a different person. Successful, sure. Wealthy, definitely. But I'd forgotten something important. I'd forgotten that success without compassion is hollow. That wealth without humanity is worthless." He looked at Lily. "This young woman reminded me who I used to be, who I should have stayed. And in doing that, she changed not just my life, but this whole company. Because of her, we've started programs to help people who need second chances. Because of her, we've remembered that talent and potential exist in places we might not think to look. Because of her, we've become better." He pulled out an envelope. "Lily, you've already told me about the scholarship offer. About going back to school. I think you should take it. Finish your degree. Become everything you were meant to be." He handed her the envelope. "But in the meantime, consider this a gift. From everyone here who's been touched by your music." Lily opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check. She looked at the amount and gasped. $25,000, it's from all of us, Victor said quickly. "Everyone in this company contributed what they could. Because you gave us something beautiful, and we wanted to give something back." Lily couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. She just stood there, crying again. But these were the good tears, the kind that came from joy too big to hold inside. Later, after the concert ended and most people had left, Lily and Victor stood in the empty hall. The piano sat silent now, but the echo of music still seemed to hang in the air. "I'm going to take the scholarship," Lily said, "but I'm not leaving. I'll do both. School during the day, concerts here in the evenings." "You don't have to," Victor said. "You don't owe me anything, I know. But I want to. This place saved my life. These people saved my life. I'm not walking away from that." Victor smiled. "You're going to be exhausted. Probably. But I've been through worse." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, both thinking about that rainy night 6 months ago, about how one moment of cruelty had transformed into compassion, about how one person reaching out had created ripples that touched hundreds of lives. "Thank you," Lily said finally, "for seeing me when everyone else looked away." "Thank you," Victor replied, "for reminding me how to be human." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere, someone else was struggling. Someone else was invisible. Someone else was one bad break away from losing everything. But inside that concert hall, for one night at least, 2 people had proven that hope wasn't just possible. It was real. And